Hello and welcome to Quartermaster, a once in a quarter show with the one and only Saurabh Mukherjea, investment guru and founder of Marcellus Investment Managers. It's that time of the quarter when we have to talk to Saurabh, pick his mind, and get him to share his thoughts on not just the issue of the day or the month, but of the quarter. And one issue that is dominating the world is the Russian invasion of Ukraine and its devastating repercussions around the world. But we won't be talking about that because a few million words have been written and said about it already. What we will talk about, though, is zoom out of the geopolitics and analyze open countries or societies and those that are closed. The reason is that what has happened in the last quarter, or the current quarter, as we come to the end of this quarter, is as momentous as the fall of the Berlin Wall. And what Russia has done and what China does, or how Russia and China have been coming together in this geopolitical crisis, has very major implications for how the world moves forward, what it does to not just geopolitics, but also to the economy, to the shape of trade, to investment, and the quality of lives of people around the world. What does it mean for people and their economies? And eventually, what does all the change around us mean for India, the Indian economy, and finally, the Indian investor? So, welcome back, Saurabh. So good to have you back on Quartermaster.
Thanks,
The
man.
response to our first episode, I thought, was overwhelming. Almost 85,000 views and loads of happy viewer comments. Hope you enjoyed it too.
It was great fun, and it's always good fun to talk about subjects of greater geopolitical relevance rather than this evening share price movements on the Indian market.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, that volatility is something I don't even want to go into. So let's not go there. But sort of, why are we focusing on change on the global scale? On what has happened in Europe and what it means for us, and more specifically, open and closed countries, or open and closed societies, if you will, as you phrased it during our discussion before the show.
Sure. So Vaishnavi, here is the sort of background. So people like me, investors like me, we earn a living by helping build individuals or institutions portfolios and positioning those portfolios to make money over 3, 5, and 10 years and so on. And one of the things I studied when I was at the LSE was there's actually a fairly well-established body of thought in economics, which shows you that when a country opens up its economy, when a country opens up its economy to foreign trade, to foreign investment, subsequently that country grows faster. Companies in that country grow faster, and obviously investors into that economy, into that country, prosper. Right. So there's been plenty of research over the last 40 years on this opening up effect, as I call it. And India and China, for example, have been extensively studied using this framework over the last 30, 40 years. And what that has shown, not just for India, China, but also more generally for the East Asian tigers, the Asian dragon economies, is you open up countries to trade, to foreign investment, you subsequently get an upsurge in prosperity, right? And therefore, opening up of a country, so to speak, the opening up of an economy, in inverted commas, becomes the lead indicator of future prosperity, right? But the converse is also true. If you think about it, right, whenever a society or a country is under threat, if that society or that country is to hang together, they usually need to find a common identity, right? And usually these common identities are either found through religion or they are found through ideology, right? So ideology could be communism, ideology could be Marxism, religion is self-explanatory. So when a society or a country is under attack and it unites around religion or ideology, it typically ends up shutting itself to the broader world, right? Most memorably and obviously, Russia after 1917, China after 1949, right? These countries found themselves under attack. They united around communism and they shut themselves off from the world for 50, 60, 70 years. And once a country shuts itself off from the world, the opposite of opening up is shutting a country off from the world. Once a country shuts itself from the world, it tends to build an internal mythology, an internal philosophy, saying that the world is bad, the world is decadent, we are the virtuous ones, and we therefore shan't pollute ourselves by exposing our people, our economy to the broader world, that in turn sets off a vicious downward spiral. The country falls behind technologically, the country falls behind on the intellectual front, and it sort of descends into a poorer and less prosperous state. So, in both directions, the opening up of a country tends to be a lead indicator of future prosperity, and the shutting off of a country, especially the ideological shutting off of a country, tends to be a lead indicator of future devastation. And that's why this whole dynamic of opening up and shutting off is so fascinating to study, because it's the best indicator we have of the countries that will do well and do badly over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
So, Saurabh, we have the experience of what Russia went through and what China went through. And I mean, these are the two dragons in the room right now, although Russia is breathing fire and China is not breathing fire yet. What do we know from, the experiences of what Russia went through and what China went through?
So before we sort of go look into the Russian and Chinese experience, one point I'll make about why is it so rare to get large countries like Russia, China, or indeed India, right? Why is it rare to find large countries staying open societies, open economies for long periods of time? The reason is an open society and an open economy actually is a paradoxical construct, right? So for a country to be open, it needs strong institutions which can serve as a check and balance on the powers of the judiciary, the parliament, the executive, and the armed forces, right? So for example, in countries like UK and America, and indeed to some extent India over the last 40, 50 years, what you'll find is that the state is strong, especially say USA or UK. The state is strong, and yet the state, the executive that is willing to submit itself to the whims and fancies of voters, to the diktats of the judiciary. So it's a very paradoxical creation. The American state has to be strong to enforce law and order, but at the same time, the American state has to be willing to say, if the judge says you, the president, are impeached, you got to be out of here. If the voters say you, the president, have lost the election, you got to be out of here. Similarly, the American armed forces have to be strong, but they shouldn't want to seize power. Right? So you can immediately see, right, the checks and balances. You want a strong state, a strong army, but at the same time, you want the state and the army to stay subjugated to the decisions of voters and to the decisions of the judiciary. Historically, countries have found it very, very hard to strike this balance, right? And it's with that background, let's now discuss Russia and China's experience. So if you look back at Russia, over the last 500 years, Russia has been an ethnically united, very strong state. It's been a state which has been typically run from Moscow. It has been typically run by a strong man. Rarely has that strong man been elected. And why is that? Why is Russia like this, right? Why is it run from Moscow, centrally run from Moscow? It's not a federal construct unlike India. It's not a federal construct unlike America. And rarely is the Russian leader a democratically elected leader. Almost always he's a strong man, right? Why is that? The reason is in Russia's history. So around 1300, the Mongols invaded Russia. Genghis Khan and family invaded Russia and absolutely thrashed them. The Mongols were nomads. The Russians were farmers. The Mongols didn't know a thing about farming. The Russians didn't know a thing about nomadic invaders, and the Mongols took the Russians to the cleaners, right? Loot, rape, murder, pillage, enslavement, the whole 9 yards. The Russians were pounded basically for the best part of 100 years, and the Russians learned from this big time. By 1550, the Russians had regrouped. And basically from 1550 onwards, what I would say, the creation of the strong Russian state from Moscow begins. And typically, if you look at Russian history since then, the Russians, the Slavic people generally have come together, and their definition initially was, we the Orthodox Christians, we the Russians are Orthodox Christians, the Mongols, the Turkic people are Muslims, and the us versus them initially was Orthodox Christians versus Muslims. Then over time, as the Russian state became strong, the Western Europeans also started pounding Russia. So if you look at Russia over the last 500 years, they've been actually fighting wars on two fronts. On their eastern fronts, they're fighting the Turkic and Mongol people. On their western front, they're fighting Europeans. Think Napoleon, think Hitler, right? And because Russia has been over the last 500 years a country attacked on both sides. Remember, unlike India, we have the Himalayas. They don't have any natural geographical boundaries. So Russia has been a state under almost constant attack. Either the Europeans are having a go or the Asians are having a go. And Russia, therefore, has defined itself as a strong state whose cohesion is around a leader run from a leader sitting in Moscow. Whether the leader is a Russian Tsar, Peter the Great, he's a Lenin, he's a Putin. Ironically, the identity of the leader and the strongman philosophy espoused by the leader has been a secondary detail. It's been rare to find a democratically elected Russian leader, and it's been rare to see Russian society rebelling against the leader, no matter who the leader might be. Right? So, strong state, but not a state which is democratically elected. Neither is it a state which is accountable to the people. Right? Very peculiar construct, very unlike any other European country, a large European country that you and I might know about, right? So that's Russia's history. China is unique in another way. In a way, China is the most historians say. For example, if you read Francis Fukuyama and the Origins of Political Order, both in the Origins of Political Order and in the subsequent book, Political Order and Decay, Fukuyama shows you, China is a unique state. China is the first strong modern state. As early as 200 BC, YP, as early as 200 BC, China had created what looked like very similar to a modern authoritarian state. So under the Qin dynasty, QIN, under the Qin dynasty, they created a centralized set of rules from Beijing. They created weights and measures. They created a legal system. They created an impersonal bureaucracy, right? Civil servants. They created a common language for governing China, right? And as early as 2000 years ago, China created the state in the sense that Europe understood only 2000 years later, right? But the state in China, the strong state, was never ever electorally created. It was a creation of the king. And over time, China went through various kings and dynasties and so on. But China's identity around a strong, centrally run state, not democratically, in fact, never democratically elected, at the same time, a state able to mobilize resources on an epic scale has been very singular. So both of these countries, China due to internal factors, Russia due to attacks, both of these countries have created extremely strong states. States of that strength weren't created in Europe until 200 years ago. In neither case was the strong state due to democracy or elections. In neither case was the state held accountable by the people. And hence, it's a completely different construct to what Americans are and Indians are actually accustomed to, which is why we in India actually struggle at many levels to understand China, and indeed Americans struggle to understand Russia, because they are so polar opposite to what India and America stand for.
Focusing more specifically on China, because that's something that keeps coming in our own conversations, the two Asian tigers, Himalayan neighbors, Asian giants, and all of that. China's experience has been slightly different from that of Russia, where, at least in the last century, we saw China being closed and then opening again. And now we see a prosperous China, trying to close down again. What seems to be happening there, and how is it different from what happened with us in India?
Right. So China's experience, I think, is interesting in that, as I said, it's a closed society, and as you explained, that they opened up in the 70s. So if you look at China's history, and indeed if you look at the history of any closed society, the closed society only opens up from time to time when the rulers of that society feel that they're unassailable. If the closed society rulers feel any threat, they're obviously going to keep the society closed. So, for example, the North Korean ruler is not going to open up North Korea unless he feels unassailable. Mm-hmm. So when did the communists feel unassailable? 49 is when the communists took charge in China. It wasn't till the early 70s that Mao felt that China could gradually start opening up. And famously, 1972, is when Mao and Richard Nixon met, only one of the most famous summit meetings of any country. That Mao-Richard Nixon meeting in 1972 was the emergence of China from what's called the bamboo curtain, right? And then Mao passed away 76, I think. 78, Deng Xiaoping opened up China more comprehensively. He opened up its economy. He opened up China to the world's science, the world's technology, Western management systems. Then told his officers, told his officials to learn from the world, to build friendship with other nations, so that these other nations could help China with funding, with technology, with knowledge. So just to be clear, China's opening up under Deng in 1978 was done very specifically, not to pull in political ideas or democracy from the West. Oh my God, don't even think about that. What China wanted from the West was science, technology, Western management systems, and if possible, Western capital as well, right? So that's how China opened up. In a way, what we are seeing with China over the last 10 years is implicitly and sometimes explicitly, China is saying, boys and girls, the job is pretty much done. We have your science, we have your technology. In fact, in many areas, China is now ahead of the West on technology. So, for example, on gene editing, it's almost sure that China is well ahead of America in gene editing. In many aspects of artificial intelligence, China is now the world leader. So, the Chinese leadership is relatively explicitly saying, we've got ourselves sorted out on science and technology and management systems. And therefore, we're going to start shutting the bamboo curtain once again. And Xi is orchestrating the shutting of the bamboo curtain. And he's also orchestrating the creation of China's own sphere of influence, countries like Pakistan, perhaps Sri Lanka, certainly some African countries.
Yeah.
And interestingly, potentially China and Russia being part of a common block of nations, authoritarian nations. Russia has the raw materials, China has the technology. In a way, at many levels, it's a very complementary arrangement. So now that China has the science and technology and the advancement that they desired, it looks like China is reverting to its 2,000-year-old typeset, which is to become a closed society again.
But the Indian experience of opening up, Saurabh, has been different. I mean, we opened up 1991 under great pressure.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. China opened up in 78 because the communists felt unassailable. India opened up in 91 because we ran out of foreign exchange, right? There was a Gulf War and Saddam Hussein attacked Kuwait in 1990. Oil prices rocketed. Yeah. We ran out of gold, and famously, with no more than 2 weeks gold, Manmohan Singh and P.V. Narasimha Rao went to the IMF, and the IMF made the opening up of the Indian economy one of the preconditions. Now, what's interesting is, if you read Vinay Sitapathi's superb book Half Lion on Narasimha Rao, that book posits, and I would agree with that narrative. Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh used the pretext of us running out of FX as a pretext to open the Indian economy up. India, by and large, has been an open economy and an open society for much of its history. India is very, very different from China, right? Which is why this is going to be a needle clash over the next 100 years. India has been an open society and an open economy for most of its history. Now, why is that? If China is a closed society, why is India an open society? Fundamentally, it seems that somewhere around 2,500 years ago, India and China diverged. Till then, both of us were sort of tribal societies, agricultural tribal societies, gradually morphing towards creation of modern states. But 2,500 years ago, China went the side of went in the direction I described. The Qin dynasty created the strong Chinese state, unified China, weights and measures, language, law and order, bureaucracy, so on. India took a different direction. Around that time, around 2,500 years ago, the rise of the priestly caste, rise of the Brahmins, created a different power center in India from the Raja, right? And this is quite unique. If my reading of other societies, it has been no other society has come up with a alternative power center to the king quite so early in its development. So by the time, say the Mauryas took charge of the country, say 200 BC to 50 BC, India had the Varna, the caste, the Brahmin, Kshatriya, so on. Then we had Jatis, which is in the subcaste within the Varna. We also had our various languages. And as a result, the Indian state has never been strong. India's society is strong. The Indian state, including the British, has been sometimes a superficial overlay on what is a very strong society, right? And the inability of the Indian state to exert power on Indian society, to change our ways of life, to change our customs, has rendered India a far more open society. And because rulers have figured this out, Indian rulers from for the last 2,500 years, including Ashoka, including the Guptas in 300 AD, including the Mughals, the Indian rulers have felt accountable to the public. Mm-hmm. Right? A, the rulers haven't been as strong as the Chinese rulers, and B, the rulers have existed almost, even though sometimes in many cases they're not democratically elected, the rulers have felt accountable to the public, and the quid pro quo has been, you're the Raja, you look after my land and my sort of property. In return, I pay you a tax, Mr. Raja. I will pay you a tax, and that's the quid pro quo. You stop rendering me protection. You stop providing protection to me, Mr. Raja. I stop paying you taxes. And that arrangement has meant that the Indian leaders, the leadership from Rajas to our modern day politicians, have had a degree of accountability to the public, which hasn't been seen in India. And hence, when in 1991, with the Berlin Wall down, with money running out, with socialism a failed philosophy, and when in 1991, our leadership had the first opportunity to open up the country and deliver better economic outcomes, our leadership grabbed it. And therefore, what we see in India is a leadership which is far more focused on the people. What we see in China and Russia is a leadership which is far more focused on itself and its interests. And these are two very different political systems. The Chinese state is more powerful than the Indian state, arguably, but Indian society is stronger than Chinese society in delivering accountability for its citizens.
But Saurabh, let's look at what happened since then. I mean, the 1990s onwards, the post-Berlin Wall, the post-91 time of India opening up, a lot more opening up happened around the world in the 90s. Many countries followed the cue of the wall falling, of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And now, the last 10 years, as in the 10 years from where we are looking back in 22, things are moving in the opposite direction. So it's almost like within 3 decades, things have moved in one direction and then they're going back in the other direction. How do you explain that?
So I think, look, this is why this whole subject and your characterization of Ukraine, the events in Ukraine as the second Berlin Wall, I think is apt. So history tends to have structural trends, and you tend to get catalysts or events which mark the structural trends. So, for example, if we look at the 90s, the reason so many countries swung from closed systems, from authoritarian systems to open systems was, in a way, the Berlin Wall, the falling of the Berlin Wall, the dismantling of the USSR took away the ideological underpinnings of authoritarian communist societies, right? With the Berlin Wall down, with the USSR in free fall, the events of Boris Yeltsin's coup, if you want to call it, the Gorbachev stepping down, the whole premise on which many African nations, many closed societies in Asia and Africa were run was defeated. Communism was seen to be a failed philosophy. And in parallel, as communism failed, several countries in Asia saw that, look, Japan is doing pretty well. Taiwan is doing well, Korea is doing well, Singapore and Hong Kong are doing well. So a new exemplar arose that you got to give up on this communist thing. It doesn't make your people happy. It doesn't make you money. Look at the Japanese paradigm. Look at the East Asian paradigm. Let's open up the economy and get rich, right? And if you think about it, China in a way is a grand form of that. Let's open up the economy. Let's get rich. India 91 followed the same path, and even countries like Bangladesh, to a lesser extent, say Sri Lanka, the Eastern European countries, we all joined the 1990-91. We all joined the bandwagon to let's join the global economy and get rich like the Japanese, so to speak, right? That wave started receding with the global financial crisis. The global financial crisis, in a way, was a massive setback for free market capitalism, because it showed that the West hasn't got it all figured out, right? And as the global financial crisis pounded the global economy, and as China continued to prosper even after the global financial crisis, a lot of countries turned around and said, hey, the Westerners, the Americans especially, don't have all the answers. The IMF and the World Bank certainly don't have all the answers. Look at what they have done to China. Remember, in the mid 90s, we also had the East Asian crisis. Countries like Indonesia, Malaysia suffered badly. And from 2008-9 onwards, the tide has turned. So, in fact, if you look at the Freedom House is this not-for-profit which publishes data on how many countries have opened up or closed off. For the last 13 years, basically since the GFC, Freedom House's data shows every year incrementally more countries have chosen to close off their economies and close off their political systems. And therefore, what the positive wave, which began with the Berlin Wall, started receding with the global financial crisis. China became the exemplar. Rulers all across the world said, what on earth am I doing going for elections and democracy? If the Chinese can have it all, their economy is booming, and there's an authoritarian state running it. Boss, I also want that. It's like having your cake and eating it too. And that's become now the paradigm. Russia, quite explicitly, is buying into that paradigm, saying the Russian rulers quite explicitly idolize the Chinese state, authoritarian, prosperous. And now the new paradigm for a lot of countries in Asia and Africa is the Chinese state, no longer the American model.
And if I may also add, Saurabh, for a lot of people, Singapore, although it's a city-state, is a similar model, authoritarian but prosperous. And Lee Kuan Yew is supposed to be the guru for a lot of modern-day leaders.
Nicely put. Nicely put. So in a way, the paradigmatic leader today will say, let's emulate a Singapore or a China, depending on their taste. All this democracy and free voters, free voter franchises, and the universal adult franchise. These are all romantic notions. Let's put them by the by.
So where is this all leading to, Saurabh? Tom Friedman said the world is flat. But I think the flat world is also somewhat open, somewhat closed, new alignments, new trade blocks. Change is definitely in the air.
So in a way, the previous Cold War, Rajesh, the one that we grew up when we were school kids, that was about communism versus the free market. This Cold War, the one which has sort of started with Ukraine, and I doubt it's going to suddenly end overnight. It looks like the beginning of a new era in global politics. This one will be between authoritarian states and say, let's call it democratic states. Since we are portraying an ideological battle. Boxing on the authoritarian side clearly will be the Russians and Chinese, and looks highly likely to be a very powerful political and economic bloc. Their satellite states, places like Pakistan, perhaps Sri Lanka, places in Africa, several of the erstwhile USSR states. So that's the authoritarian bloc, right? And I'm sure they will find some other states in Latin America who will also say, I'm signing up for the authoritarian side, provided there's a good deal for me. And then on the democracy side, naturally the Americans, North Americans, let's call it, the Western Europeans, the Japanese, and more likely than not, the Indians. Given that the Chinese will be running the authoritarian bloc, I think our leaders will have no choice but to join the democracy bloc. And these will be the contours of the new world, a very different world to the world we have lived in for the last 20 years. Much of what constitutes free trade will gradually unravel. The new trading blocks will be around these authoritarian trading bloc and a democratic trading bloc. I also suspect that countries like Germany, like Japan will have to go nuclear, right, in order to maintain their security in the face of growing might of the Sino-Russian bloc. And in this context, if you focus on India's place in the sun, right? Ironically, I reckon India's place in the sun actually won't be that bad a place to be in, right? As I said, India.
Sorry, Saurabh. That was where I was, coming to for the money question,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is what does it mean for India? What can we expect? I'm sorry to have interrupted you, but what can India expect from all this? The opening up of the, to the world at a, large over the last 30 years. Uh, and do you worry about all this talk about self-reliance and Atmanirbharta, which seems like, we too seem to be sort of flirting with closing a bit?
Right. So let's first focus on ideologically, right? Where do we stand? I think, given, as I said, given our history, that we are a far less centralized state than China or Russia, given that the Indian state is far more accountable to its citizens, it resembles UK and USA and Japan more so than it resembles Russia, China. Ironically, the reason India resembles UK and USA is very different from the reasons America and the British have been able to build open societies. Our reasons are a unique history. The American and British open societies have different underpinnings, but no matter, the outcome is similar. We have a state. The Indian state is far more accountable, and therefore we are more likely than not to gravitate towards the European, American, Japanese trading bloc. I think the logical deal we will cut is, we will say, we need your arms, because historically we bought our arms from the Russians. If you don't want us to buy arms from the Russians, you need to give us arms and ammunition. You need to give us weaponry. We'll have to step up our spend on defense. India spends around $70 billion on defense. China spends 10x that. India spends 2.5% of GDP on defense. That seems woefully inadequate given the world that we're heading towards. As we need to step up our defense spend, we will obviously turn to countries like Japan, Germany, and America for help. And the quid pro quo, I think, will be, Rajesh, foreign investment by them. These countries will invest both through FDI, foreign direct investment, in Indian plant, Indian factories. We will also get technology transfers, I suspect. And in a way, much like what America did after the Second World War, it's something like the Marshall Plan to resurrect Japan. We'll probably get some version of that, perhaps not as dramatic as that. But I think that will be India's pitch, that the world is polarizing once again. It's Cold War Part 2. If you want us to be part of your camp, can we see the FDI coming through? And the Japanese Prime Minister's visit, I think Mr. Kishida's visit over the weekend, was exactly that, right? This is the realignment of the new world, where the Prime Minister from Japan flew over to India, said that the FDI is coming. I suspect there's a few other things coming as well, which they didn't make public. And I suspect we will get similar trips, similar dialogue between the German Premier, Olaf Scholz, between Joe Biden and our leaders. So the next 10 years, if you ask me, is about far more foreign investment in India than we've ever received before, far more foreign technology coming to India. And in return, what our leadership will have to make a call is, how closely do we want to align to the democratic Western Japanese bloc, as opposed to the authoritarian Sino-Russo bloc. And my call is that we will probably end up with a very tight alignment with the democratic Western Japanese bloc in return for technology and dollars coming in. So at one level, cities like Bangalore, Bombay, Delhi, Hyderabad, Pune will boom, right? We will get more business than ever before from the West. At another level, the cost of a lot of things will go up, because a lot of the cheap stuff that used to come from China, right, including the laptop in which I'm speaking to you, including, I suspect, many of our the electronic instruments in our life. A lot of that will, I think, stop coming, and we will see a different rerouting of global trade. Arguably, these things will become more expensive. A lot of the things that we take for granted, cars, bikes, electronic items, arguably will become more expensive. But at the same time, we will probably get elevated levels of foreign investment and perhaps economic growth over the next 10 years.
That's such a masterclass, Saurabh, a closer, tighter embrace with the Western democratic world. But there are pros and cons. For those of you who know Saurabh Mukherjee talking about markets and the movements in stocks, this is a completely different Saurabh Mukherjee talking about geopolitical changes and how they impact countries and their economies and markets. So at the end of the day, there is an underlying lesson to what we can make out from all the geopolitical changes that are going on, and take home the lessons we have to take home. Thank you, Saurabh. Thank you so much for this second episode of Quartermaster. Hope our viewers enjoyed as much as I have these last 40 odd minutes. We will be back next quarter again with another episode of Quartermaster. Until then, I hope you enjoy this, and please, put in your comments and let us know what you thought of this. Thank you.
Thank you, IP. Thank you for hosting me.